Of all of Africa's notorious dictators who have come and gone over the years, one of the strangest, yet perhaps one of the least well known, was Jean Bedel Bokassa, the Mad Emperor of Africa. Noted for his extravagant coronation as Emperor Bokassa I in 1977, he was rumoured to have had his enemies fed alive to lions and crocodiles in his personal zoo, and was also said to be a cannibal, keeping human bodies in his palace basement to be eaten and served up to unsuspecting foreign visitors. A serial womanizer, he had many wives and countless mistresses, and is thought to have fathered over 100 children. He loved fine food and exquisite French brandy. He lived a life of utter luxury, while his countrymen struggled in squalor. The Central African Republic is a large landlocked country which lies, as the name suggests, in the heart of the African continent. During the colonial era, it was governed by France under the name of French Equatorial Africa. The country finally gained independence in 1960 under the leadership of President David Dacko, who then used the next 2 years to suppress any opposition and create a one-party system of governance. Although the Central African Republic was now fully independent, historical ties with France remained strong. Jean Bedel Bokassa was born on the 22nd of February 1922, one of 12 children of a local village chieftain. At the age of 6, he witnessed his father being beaten to death in the village square, and a week later, his mother committed suicide. Now an orphan, Bokassa was sent to a Christian mission school in order to receive an education, and this was where he gained his nickname of Jean Bedel, after his teachers noticed his fondness for a French grammar book, written by a certain Jean Bedel. After graduating, Bokassa joined the French colonial forces and he saw action during World War II in France and Germany. After World War II, he served a brief spell in Indochina, and by the early 1960s Bokassa was back in the Central African Republic. Having left the French army, he enlisted in the Central African Armed Forces, and being a cousin of the President Dacko, Bokassa was able to quickly rise through the ranks. 1 year later, he achieved the rank of colonel, and he was now effectively in charge of the army and was enjoying all the prestige that his new rank conferred. He frequently appeared in public, wearing all his military decorations, and often sat next to Dacko to display his importance in the government. Despite the number of military coups that were taking place in Africa at the time, Dacko publicly dismissed the likelihood that Bokassa would try to take control of the country. At an official dinner, he joked, "Colonel Bokassa only wants to collect medals, and he's too stupid to pull off a coup d'etat." Dacko would regret not taking these warnings seriously. With the support of the military, Bokassa seized power on the 31st of December 1965, arresting Dacko and forcing him to resign. Promising a new era of equality for all Central Africans, Bokassa informed the nation that he was now their new leader. The new regime, under Bokassa, began to consolidate its power and crack down on the populace. Men and women between the ages of 18 and 55 had to provide proof that they had jobs, or else they would be fined or imprisoned. Begging was banned, live music was allowed only during the nights and weekends, and a morality brigade was formed in the capital to monitor bars and dance halls. Petty theft was now punishable by having your ear cut off. Alarmed at Bokassa's extravagant spending, Alexandra Banza, the newly appointed Minister of Finance and one of Bokassa's original collaborators, began a plot to remove Bokassa from power. However, before action could be taken, the plan was uncovered, and Banza was arrested. His arms were broken, and he was beaten almost to death by Bokassa. For appearance's sake, a military tribunal was convened where it said that Banza, having confessed his guilt, was then tied to a pillar in the conference room, whereupon Bokassa slashed him open with a knife. Guards then beat Banza, smashing his spinal column before he was finally shot. The body was dragged around the military camp as an example of what happened to opponents of the new president. After this, Bokassa surrounded himself with lackeys and sycophants and embarked upon a lavish spending spree, building himself a palace with zoo outside of the capital Bangui, and buying up property abroad, including a French chateau in the suburbs of Paris. Political opponents and alleged criminals were rounded up and killed. Sometimes Bokassa personally beat them before they were shot, or worse, fed alive to the animals in his private zoo. Rumours of his cannibalism began to mount, with a French magazine printing pictures of what appeared to be bodies hanging in his palace fridge, ready for butchering. Bokassa adored power, and he thought so much of himself that he declared himself president for life in 1972, and later on declared himself a 7-star field marshal. By the mid-1970s, his list of titles and accolades was ludicrously long. He was already Minister of the Interior, Minister of Defence and Agriculture, Trade, Industry, Mines, Transportation. He was also the recipient of 32 self-awarded national orders, including Best Engineer, Best Farmer and Best Soccer Player. All of this was still not enough, and his dreams of glory culminated with the renaming of the Central African Republic to the Central African Empire, with him as its new emperor, Bokassa I. The coronation date was set for December 4th, 1977, in the sports stadium Jean Bedel Bokassa, next to Jean Bedel Bokassa University, which was situated on Bokassa Avenue. The coronation ceremony had to faithfully replicate that of his favourite figure, Napoleon Bonaparte, with staggering attention to detail. Paris sculptor Olivier Brice was invited to design the throne and the coronation carriage. A team of 30 French artisans were hired to fashion the 2-ton gold-plated bronze throne worth $2.5 million. Brice bought an antique coach in Nice and refurbished it in the Napoleonic style, along with 8 white horses imported from Belgium to pull it. The 200-year-old French firm which had embroidered Napoleon's uniforms was called on to create Bokassa's coronation attire and the coronation grounds for Empress Catherine, the favourite of Bokassa's wives. Imperial crowns and gold laurel wreaths were commissioned from jewellers, and the imperial sceptre, sword and other bits and pieces, the total jewellery bill alone was reaching $5 million. Finally, in order to take the guests around Bangui in style and comfort, 60 brand new Mercedes-Benz were ordered in from Germany. The cars were shipped to Cameroon, and from there they were air freighted into the landlocked empire. The air freight charges alone came to $5,000 per car, but no expense was to be spared for this occasion. French chefs were flown in to create a banquet, and 24,000 bottles of Moët and Chandon champagne, 4,000 bottles of Chateau Mouton Rothschild and Chateau Lafite Rothschild were also imported. Thousands of invitations were sent out to heads of state around the world, but many refused to attend, viewing the whole spectacle as a gigantic waste of time. However, many guests did attend, including foreign ministers, wives of heads of state, minor aristocrats, businessmen and journalists. It was after the main banquet was over that Bokassa allegedly turned to Robert Gallet, the French Minister for Cooperation, and whispered to him, "You never noticed, but you just ate human flesh." So either Bokassa had a rare sense of humour about his alleged cannibalism, or his guests had just been served up human remains as part of the banquet. It's been estimated that this lavish spectacle cost over $20 million US. In today's money, that's over $110 million. The cost wiped out the entire aid budget for the country for the year and accounted for 1/3 of the whole fiscal budget for the entire year. Despite the gruesome rumours and Bokassa treating the country as his own personal playground, he continued to enjoy the support of the French government, with the French president, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, being counted as a close personal friend. Giscard would go hunting at Bokassa's private game reserves, and he enjoyed the dining and hospitality offered to him by Bokassa. Extravagant gifts of diamonds and ivory also helped to keep the French president happy, and at the same time Bokassa was selling uranium to France in exchange for large amounts of foreign aid, which he used to keep up his lavish lifestyle. Bokassa's eventual downfall came in 1979 when a group of 180 school children, protesting at having to wear expensive uniforms sporting Bokassa's image, were rounded up and put in Bangui jail. Visiting the jail, Bokassa flew into a rage and he and his guards began to beat the children. Over 150 children were beaten to death. Many of them were killed by Bokassa himself. When news of this atrocity broke, it became impossible for France to continue to be seen to support the regime. While Bokassa was abroad in Libya, a French-backed coup was staged, returning Dacko to power. The days of the Central African Empire were at an end. Bokassa initially sought sanctuary in France, but he was refused, and he fled to the Ivory Coast, where he stayed for 4 years before the French allowed him to settle in France. He lived in his chateau on the outskirts of Paris, complaining bitterly of his exile and writing lurid memoirs recounting the sexual dalliances of the then ex-president Giscard. Bokassa's presence in France proved embarrassing to many government ministers who had supported him during his tyrannical rule. In 1986, Bokassa finally returned to the Central African Republic to stand trial on charges of embezzlement, murder and cannibalism. Although acquitted on a technicality of the cannibalism charges, he was found guilty on the other charges and sentenced to death. This was later commuted to life imprisonment, but he was actually released in 1993 and lived out the rest of his years in his crumbling palace, surrounded by his 17 wives and his many children. He died of a heart attack in 1996. Bokassa was undeniably brutal. He was a child killer. There's a strong possibility that he was a serial cannibal, and he squandered most of the country's wealth on his lavish lifestyle. Yet despite all this, the era of his rule is now seen by many older residents as a golden age for the Central African Republic. Now this may be in part a reflection of just how bad life has become for many in the modern day. Intercommunal and religious violence has left the country in a never-ending spiral of savagery, and against this backdrop, a brutal dictatorship probably seems like a step in the right direction. As one local leader noted, "It was a dictatorship, but there was also order and stability. There is no civic responsibility anymore, and there is no patriotism either. Looking back, the time of Bokassa was something to admire. That man did great things." To mark the Central African Republic's 50th anniversary of independence in 2010, the then president pardoned Bokassa posthumously, declaring him a son of the nation, recognised by all as a great builder. In the end, Bokassa's legacy amounted to almost nothing. A series of dilapidated palaces, dozens of children from multiple wives, a grainy videotape of a lavish coronation for Africa's last emperor. One final note. In an image reminiscent of the poem Ozymandias is the anecdote of one journalist who interviewed Bokassa just before his death in 1996. As the journalist was leaving Bangui on his way to the airport, he spotted something out of the car window. Tossed to one side of the sports stadium, under an arch of crumbling concrete, there was Bokassa's famous throne. It was rusty, but instantly recognisable. 3.5 meters high, shaped like a Napoleonic eagle with 2 huge golden wings. An emperor's throne, rusting and rotting in the trash. A fitting image for Africa's last emperor.